Okay, welcome. Good morning, everybody. Can
Hey,
you
Sean.
guys, Anthony, can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you well. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, but I had a few technical things with the computer I had to get going before I could start. So we're here. I think we've done an interview with you on this platform before. So basically, folks in the chat are able to ask some questions if they feel the desire to. This is for you guys that are on YouTube watching. You can come on over to MeterX and ask questions there. Anyway, well, how are things today? You're still up in Minnesota, I'm assuming. Is that correct?
Normally, but today I'm actually in Mississippi, so if my sound is a little bit delayed or something, I'm on a hotspot, so should be
Okay. No, I
okay.
can hear you. Okay. I can't see you though. Are you able to come on video?
Yeah, I don't have the bandwidth to pull up
Okay,
video.
that's fine. That's fine. We know what you look like. There you are. You still look the same as you did last time, I think. I assume so. Well, what's the latest with you? Tell me what's going on. Well, just I guess just a quick intro. Just tell folks your maybe the 2-minute version of your background in case folks don't remember from
Sure.
last time, and we'll see what's going on.
Yeah. So I've got a Ph.D. in biochemistry from Boston University Medical School, which is a different campus than the main campus at BU. It's a shittier campus, but it's got better science. And and then from there Uh, I moved up to Minnesota, worked at I got hired at the Mayo Clinic. I actually had a year in between there where I wrote a book called Estrogeneration, and then I founded a nonprofit where we were teaching international medical students, but I closed that down um, just because it wasn't really, I just didn't like it that much. It was difficult to work with the modern medical system. Yeah, and then I mean, I've been working at the Mayo Clinic the last 3 years, and also on the side, I've done a lot of DNA consulting. So just this morning, I had a DNA consult with a guy from Portland, and I tried to convince him to move out of Portland, and you know, just a lot of that stuff. And it's interesting relative to carnivore. I don't know what if you have a planned, like thing to talk about, but I have some interesting genes I could bring up that are super fascinating. Whoops.
Yeah, I'm open to talking about anything you want to discuss. I didn't have any real
Hmm.
specific things. I'd love to let you kind of talk
Yeah.
what you found interesting because I mean, last time we talked, I think we talked about
Talk estrogens.
estrogens in water and
Right.
environmental and endocrine disruptors, which are apparently ubiquitous and
Right.
turning. I recently saw you maybe saw some headlines. I guess a Japanese researcher successfully turned
Yep.
female catfish into male catfish feeding a
Hmm.
soybean extract or something like that. I don't know if
Yeah, exactly. No, yeah, they're always doing that stuff. They call it male feminization, but scientists don't like to use the term because of the politics. But even if you search PubMed for male feminization, you can find it. They used a soybean extract. It's actually isoflavone. It's the stuff that's in all the
right,
soybeans.
right.
And they turn male fish into females.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, obviously the
Crazy.
question, the natural question is what is the impact on human males? Is there
Right.
any evidence? And I think, I know that's a topic where people
People
will
argue. Yeah.
argue about. I mean, but I mean, I guess there is some evidence that suggested that may be occurring in humans, but it's not consensus evidence. Is that fair to say?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And there's a lot of muddying of the waters with some of these company publications, these corporate sponsored publications to try and say, no, well, everybody agrees that soy isoflavone in particular, it acts like estrogen. Everybody agrees. All the scientists agree. There's actually a total consensus on that. So if anybody says like, well, soy doesn't act like estrogen, they haven't looked into it at all, probably. Now, the argument that people get into is whether it's good estrogen or bad estrogen. Because estrogen obviously can be protective for your arteries, protective for your brain. It's good for you. It's important. It wouldn't be a hormone in your body if it wasn't important. But, if you got too much estrogen and it imbalances your testosterone, that's an obvious problem. You know what I mean? And so that's where people get into debates.
Yeah, and I guess the just by saying too much, I mean, it's like too much anything.
Arbitrary.
It's arbitrary. So I mean, it's one of those things
Yeah.
where you have to say what's too much, what's not too
Well,
much.
well, and I
What's
get into even more nuance because with testosterone, there's one receptor, right? There's the androgen receptor. It picks up testosterone. Pretty simple. I like to say men are pretty simple, but then with women it gets complicated because
Yeah.
with estrogen there's three estrogens, right? There's estrone, there's estriol, there's estradiol. If you want to get into some of the other estrogens, there's actually a few other ones, but they're super minor. But there's three estrogens, and then there's actually two receptors that pick it up, right? So there's estrogen receptor alpha and beta. Estrogen receptor alpha, estrogen receptor beta. And the alpha receptor is only supposed to be activated during sexual development. I mean, it's very important, but you're not really supposed to be activating your alpha receptor as an adult. That'll increase breast cancer, that'll increase prostate cancer, cause all kinds of problems, depression. You see it with postpartum depression, things like that. Now, estrogen receptor beta, the other receptor, if you flip that switch on, if you activate that, that's a good thing. That's healthy. That's protective against prostate cancer, protective against breast cancer, all kinds of good benefits there. And so the real argument with the soy is, does isoflavone, does the soy estrogen act on the beta receptor or the alpha receptor? Is it the good one or the bad one? And there's actually studies that show both. So honestly, it does depend on the person, depends on the genetics. And there's enough estrogen in our society that we don't need more estrogen. That's my take on it. And that's number one. And then number two, all the estrogens around us, like the plastics we were talking about last time and the fragrances people are using that have these fake estrogens in them, and the sunscreen. I mean, shit, they did a sunscreen study recently where one application of sunscreen increased oxybenzone levels into the blood above the government's own safety limits, and oxybenzone is an estrogen. One application of sunscreen, 7 days later, people's blood was still above the government's own safety limits for oxybenzone. And so we got the sunscreen chemicals, and they're in our personal care products. They're in the lotions. We got all these fragrances. We got all these plastics. They're all increasing estrogen. And then you throw soy in there, and it's like, well, how much of an impact is that having? I don't know, because it's all washed out with all these other estrogens. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I guess for whatever reason, my skincare routine is I don't have one. It's basically I take a shower and clean the dirt off, and I don't eat any soy.
Yeah.
So obviously, I'm suffering from toxic masculinity because I don't have enough estrogen in my life. Apparently, I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Well, and the
Yeah.
other thing about just the other thing about soy was they did a study uh, with like over 100 plant food items, just looking for estrogen. Just saying, like, well, let's look at how much plant phytoestrogen, they call it, how much plant estrogen is in all these foods. And all the plants are basically under 1,000 units of estrogen, except soy and flax. Or excuse me, they were under under 1,000 units. I'll just keep it simple and say units. Under 1,000, except soy and flax. Soy and flax were over 100,000. So clearly estrogenic.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. Anyway, I don't that's not on my menu. But so let's talk a little bit about some of the genetic stuff. You said you had some interesting genes. I don't know if it has a relevance to us meat eaters or what's
Oh
what's
yeah,
the
for
story in the
sure.
gene. Okay, let's hear about
Well,
these genes.
yeah, man. Well, have you ever heard of ABCG5 and ABCG8?
I have not. Believe it or not,
Perfect.
there's
Yes.
probably I probably haven't heard of 99.99% of all the genes that have been
Exactly.
coded
There's
out there, quite honestly. But
tens of thousands of them.
yeah,
Well,
yeah,
no, this
exactly.
one's interesting because, well, number one, it is kind of rare, but I have found several people with this gene. And I think I had one person like 2 weeks ago, and it was super ironic because she was like telling me she's a plant-based and she likes to eat really high, like heavy plant-based diet and blah blah. And um, ABCG5, ABCG8, they're two genes very similar, and some people have variants where they don't break down plant cholesterol very well. And plant cholesterol, usually it's called cytosterols, Sitosterols, cytosterol. And sometimes they call it phytosterol. It's the difference between the UK versus America, and everybody's got confused. So it's all mixed up now. Everybody's jumbling it up. But phytosterol, cytosterol, whatever. I just call it plant cholesterol, right? And obviously, humans have cholesterol. People love to talk about it. The LDL, the HDL, right? The IDL, the VLDL, all this crap. So plants, they don't have that. Like if you check a moose, they've got LDL, HDL, IDL, VLDL, the whole thing. If you check a cow, if you check a mouse, if you check a rat, right? They all have the LDL, HDL. Some of them vary a bit, but it's animal cholesterol. If you check a plant, they've got They don't have LDL, like zero plants out there with LDL, HDL. They have phytosterols, they have plant cholesterol. Totally different thing. Now, when you eat plants, probably we've never actually looked at your DNA, but you're probably clearing out plant cholesterol just fine. It's not that big of a deal. Most people clear it out. But there are probably 1% of people, 1 in 100 or so, that don't clear plant cholesterol very well. They have these genetic variants on ABCG5 and ABCG8. Usually that manifests as a health issue specific to their gallbladder. It builds up in their gallbladder and they got to get gallbladder surgery, get their gallbladder removed. Then for the rest of their life, and they want to eat fats, it's this big ordeal. It's this big problem. It sucks. And uh, more importantly, in my opinion, the problem with having really high, like when you're eating plants and you have those genetic variants, plant cholesterol builds up in your blood, and the same thing happens there as happens with familial hypercholesterolemia. You're familiar with familial hypercholesterolemia, of course. Yeah, that's when your LDL gets super, super high. It's a genetic issue. It's very rare. Ironically, it's actually more rare to have familial hypercholesterolemia than it is to have ABCG5 or ABCG8 variants that cause plant cholesterol to be outrageously high. But the doctors screen like crazy for familial hypercholesterolemia because it fits the statin realm, and it kind of allows them to pitch more statins to people, more drugs, more pharmaceuticals. But the plant cholesterol thing doesn't really fit the paradigm, right? Because as soon as you got that gene, you basically got to go carnivore. I call it the carnivore gene because if you're eating plants, it doesn't even matter what type. Plants, period, you're getting too much plant cholesterol in your body. Eventually, it stays in your blood too long. It becomes oxidized. It reacts with oxygen, damages your arteries. It causes a whole host of various health issues. Yeah, sure, it damages your gallbladder and all that. And when people have it, they're like, oh, yeah, that's funny you say that because my dad had his gallbladder removed or whatever. They have all these, or, all these specific health issues that are very predictive.
Yeah,
But again, I call it the carnivore gene.
let me ask you because so you have these plant sterols or cholesterols that are assumingly accumulating. How do you test for that? I mean, as far as does it show up like LDL cholesterol, or how
Yeah,
would it
yeah,
show
yeah.
up?
Yeah. There's only one place in the country that measures it that I know of, and it's the Mayo Clinic. They're the only ones that have an independent test where they actually measure plant cholesterol. It's called cytosterols. They measure it. There's a place in the UK. I actually did a podcast with a woman from the UK, and we were doing her DNA on the air, and she happened to have that gene, and she followed up and actually tested it over there. And again, it's just cytosterols. You just do a cytosterol blood test, serum test, and hers was outrageously high, of course, right? And obviously, I told her to cut out the plants, stop eating plants. Sure, if you want to have a little plant here and there, like some rosemary on your steak, that kind of thing, fine. And yeah, if you want to have a salad here and there occasionally, but if you're eating plants all the time, it's a disaster with that gene.
So this would be, so if you had somebody who was vegetarian or plant-based or mostly eating plants, and yet still had high LDL cholesterol, that would be a
Well,
potential
usually it
sign.
lowers. Well, usually what they do, no, it actually lowers your normal LDL, your human cholesterol, because
Yeah.
your body recognizes it's plugged up with all this plant cholesterol.
Okay.
And so it responds by lowering your natural cholesterol, your
I
LDL
see.
production.
Okay. Okay.
And so you usually come up like with total cholesterol of like 100 or 110, which is terrible. Your testosterone shuts down, obviously. And you have no energy and all this, but everybody's telling you to go plant-based, right?
So
In
you
the
so you
medical community.
so your LDL cholesterol actually goes down, but this
Yeah,
cytocholesterol is actually up and higher, but it's not being
exactly.
measured.
Correct.
Interesting. And so these would be the people that go on a low fat, low animal fat diet and get gallbladder disease.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And how common
Most
is
common.
this? How common did you say this gene is?
It's like 1 in 100 or
One in
so
a
to have
hundred.
one or the other.
And then FH is how 'cause my understanding is familial hypercholesterolemia. There are many genes that sort of marry
Yeah.
different variants for that.
Yeah, but they define familial hypercholesterolemia very loosely because that way more people fit into that category. Because literally they think 200 is too high, right? If you're above 200 on your total cholesterol, the modern cardiologist thinks your cholesterol is too high. So, oh shit, you've got familial hypercholesterolemia if your cholesterol is 250, which is bullshit. I mean, that's not right at all. But they've tried to manipulate some of these genetic variants, say, oh, look at this, it raises it by 10 points. You must have familial hypercholesterolemia. The legitimate familial hypercholesterolemia when your cholesterol is like 800, like those genes are super rare. I mean, less than 0.1%. Like super rare. But that they use them, they teach them in medical school as if everybody's got them, like as if they see them all the time. And that's their argument to say cholesterol is bad, is to say, look, when you've got familial hypercholesterolemia and your cholesterol is 800, you get heart attacks by age 20 because you got plaques in your heart. You got xanthomas and you got cholesterol building up under your skin, and you've got all these artery plaques, and then they say, so therefore cholesterol is bad, and let's put everybody on statins, and it's always bad. Like, I've been in those classes in medical school. I've tutored those students, right? Like, it's a dogma that cholesterol cannot be too low. Animals have a super low number, so therefore humans should have a super low number, and things like that.
So, I mean, do animals have a super low number? I don't even
Some of
know. I
them,
mean,
some of them, like
which
mice,
animal?
and well, mice do because they have a totally different. They have a they don't have, there's humans have a gene called cholesterol ester transfer protein, CETP. Mice don't even have that gene. So like they can't even convert LDL back to HDL, whereas humans can. So like their genetic makeup is so different. It's crazy that 90% of our cholesterol studies are based on mouse models. And because their machinery for dealing with cholesterol is totally different.
What about like a dog or something like that? Or
Yeah,
they,
that I'm not as familiar with all the different species.
yeah,
But generally, the bigger brain, the more intelligent, the more cholesterol,
right. So, I mean,
because our brain is super
you would,
dependent on it.
you would think a primate or maybe even a cetacean or something, a dolphin or something like that. I don't know. I've not
Yeah,
looked into,
yeah, yeah,
I've looked into glucose metabolism in some of these animals, that were carnivores, but I haven't really looked at their cholesterol. Yeah, but I
yeah.
mean, obviously we're not mice or rabbits, like, the initial cholesterol test on rabbits saying, rabbits
Oh,
could have.
all of them are done in those. Yeah, I used to do
So,
those studies.
so when we see that we have somebody that has a heart attack with a low LDL cholesterol, which clearly occurs. I mean, it's not,
Yep.
perhaps they're suffering from this phytocholesterol, this cytocholesterol issue, perhaps. Is that maybe
Yeah, sometimes, but usually more commonly it's just inflammation. They're stressed out, they're getting inflammation, they're not sleeping, they're getting inflammation, they're not exercising, they're getting inflammation. I mean, obviously exercise causes transient inflammation level to go up, but then it goes lower than baseline after that. So like it's always root cause inflammation. I did my PhD on cholesterol and sex hormones, and it's ironic because they're so focused on and obsessed with cholesterol, but when you really get into the studies, it's inflammation. It always is. Whether it's heavy metals triggering inflammation, whether it's pesticides, herbicides, stress, lack of sleep, it's always inflammation. And then cholesterol comes in, fixes the damage to the arteries, and then they blame it on cholesterol. But if you dig deep enough, it's always inflammation. So if your cholesterol is less than 100 or some outrageously low number, which I don't think that, I think that's downright bad for people. It's bad for your brain. It's bad for your sex hormones. But let's say that it is, and you get and somebody linked a study talking about smaller brains with lower cholesterol. I mean, yeah, 1/3 of your brain is cholesterol. If you dehydrate, I used to do Alzheimer's research for 3 years. If you dehydrate a human brain, you take out all the water. I used to do cadavers. I'd go every Thursday. I'd go to the morgue and do brain cuttings, and uh, 1/3 of the brain is cholesterol, and 1/3 of the brain is DHA. Like the brain is pure fat, just about. It's all cholesterol and fish oil. You know what I mean? So obviously, it's super important for the brain, but yeah, it's always inflammation, and cholesterol is trying to fix that. And people that are obsessed with these cholesterol numbers, it's silliness. It really is. When you get into the studies, and again, it's nuanced and blah blah blah, and it takes forever to dig through all that stuff. But at the end of the day, it's always some form of inflammation. And by the way, cholesterol itself can cause inflammation. If you've got familial hypercholesterolemia and your cholesterol is legit 800 or something, the cholesterol itself is staying in your blood too long, reacting with oxygen, becoming oxidized, and causing inflammation.
Yeah, I mean that's reflective. I know Asim Malhotra published an editorial in I think the British Medical Journal, Sports Journal, I think, talking about cardiovascular disease is not a disease of saturated fat clogging the artery. It's a chronic inflammatory disease,
Yep.
and that we obviously see some of those relationships. There was a oh, speaking of Alzheimer's, did you see? I guess, do you have any thoughts on the newest Alzheimer's drug that was just approved, despite 10 out of the 11 independent FDA consultants saying no, we shouldn't approve this drug. It doesn't work and may harm people. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, I mean none of the Alzheimer's drugs are. In fact, I gave a talk at the International Alzheimer's Convention in Austria, in Vienna, Austria, um, when they released their Alzheimer's amyloid beta vaccine. They actually created a vaccine. Did you know this against amyloid beta?
I think I'd heard about that a while ago, but I can't
Exactly.
say for sure,
Well,
but yeah.
yeah, exactly. It wouldn't be on the front of your mind because it didn't work. But it worked in the sense that it cleared out amyloid beta. It actually cleared out people's plaques in their brains. And so they were all excited about it because you could prove that it literally, caused the body to get rid of these amyloid plaques. And then they still had Alzheimer's. It did nothing. So huge hype. They thought it was going to be amazing. It did kind of work in the sense that it cleared out amyloid. But that's the problem, right? Because there's a Harvard researcher who's he's the amyloid beta. He's the guy that discovered it. There's Nobel Prizes on the line. They all think that lowering A beta is the real cause of Alzheimer's, and it's clearly not. Uh, there's something else going on. And by the way, when I do DNA consulting, I look at a bunch of different categories because sometimes it's blood sugar, right? Like some people have a higher risk of Alzheimer's from high blood sugar. Some people have a higher risk of Alzheimer's from cholesterol being too low. Some people have a high risk of Alzheimer's from heavy metals. Like there's genes where your brain doesn't clear heavy metals very well, and then copper builds up, or aluminum, or lead, or cobalt, or chromium, or cadmium, or whatever. There's other genes relating to BDNF. I consider that an Alzheimer's risk category, completely separate. So I think of Alzheimer's like cancer, where it's all these different subcategories. It's not one thing. And anybody who thinks it's one thing is just really oversimplifying, and they don't really understand how the brain works and how science works in general, maybe. But that's the problem with these drugs too, is they just lump it all together. They're desperately trying to get something, and the FDA allows them to approve those drugs only because there's nothing else that works in the drug realm, right? Uh, and so they think that's okay. It's crap.
Well, I mean, it was interesting to see that the company that had that approval saw a 38% increase in their valuation. They increased their valuation by $16 billion upon that approval, and on a drug that's costs $56,000 a year and is unlikely to provide any significant benefit and potentially may harm people. I mean,
Exactly.
it's just absolutely insane. And that's the
Yeah.
thing. I mean, I guess because Alzheimer's is not the only form of dementia. I mean, there's a number of different dementia diseases out there, but one of the
Right.
I can't remember, is the hallmark defining part of Alzheimer's the amyloid plaques, or is it
Yeah. Amyloid and tau. Yeah, you got to have
tau?
both
Yeah,
technically.
sure. So that's how you diagnose this, and no doubt there's different subvariants and subtypes based on maybe the etiology. That seems to make sense as well. I think most of the disease, when I learned in medical school, 10 years later, there were 5 different forms of that, you just see as you look into these things deeper and deeper, there's different variations, and whoever
Well,
decides
and
to
I
put
I
them.
went to, there's a guy at Mayo Clinic. He does brain scans of the fluidity of the brain. He's got some super high technology that's I don't even know about what he's doing exactly, but I went to a talk by him, and he's an interesting guy. And he was showing that when people have Alzheimer's, um, they expected their brain to stiffen up, like it's harder, like it's more like a rock, but it actually became more liquidy, like more fluid, and that was unexpected. Because it does shrink. I mean, when you have Alzheimer's, there's less plumbing and the brain literally gets smaller. But what, and of course, I talked to him afterwards about this because what's interesting about that indicates there's actually less cholesterol in the brain. Cholesterol stiffens cells. It actually makes the cell less fluid, more stiff, more rigid. Um, and when basically what he was showing in this research was that the brain had less cholesterol, but he didn't realize that's what he was showing. And it's because, of course, anytime you say cholesterol is good, you're going against this giant machine. You know what I mean? Like you can't, oh shit, you can't say cholesterol is good, right? Um, because there's too many cardiologists that are on the other team, and there's too many drug company dollars that are fighting against you to say that. It's risky to say that. People go crazy if you say cholesterol is good for you, but that's what his research is showing in terms of the brain. And that's what you see in general if you look at it really closely. But again, people don't want to admit that, so I mean, you've seen it. There's a million studies out there saying this supplement is good for you because it lowers cholesterol. They just assume like, oh, if it lowers cholesterol, it's good for you. Oh, curcumin is good for you because it lowers your LDL, right? That's just like an assumption that they make across the board with all these research studies to say this is good for you, that's good for you, and it's become basically dogma that, oh, that's good for you. Why? Well, because it lowers cholesterol. Oftentimes there is no why, they just say it's good for you.
Yeah, and sometimes good for you means you feel like garbage.
Exactly. That's what I always tell people, like when your cholesterol is at 110, your total cholesterol. Am I able to share screen on here?
I can let you hang on a
Probably.
second. Yeah, I think I can. Let me allow you to do that real quick. Yeah, you should be able to now. Yeah, if you want to share
Okay,
your screen, that'd
perfect.
be great. Yeah,
Yeah, let me share the screen. And I've talked to people about this when I do DNA consulting, but let me see here. I just got to open up a PDF. Give me 1 second. Sorry.
sure.
Um,
Yeah,
view
we're
our
seeing it.
share
So
screen.
you got to
Oh, look at
study
that. You can see my
total
whole screen.
cholesterol.
Do you see my whole screen or just the PDF?
I see the PDF. I see your whole screen. I see your whole screen. So maybe you can
Okay.
minimize the screen up
Yeah,
and
I
I
got
can
my deer
close the
hunting on
document.
there and all kinds of other stuff. That's all right. I'll just whatever. You guys know I'm a deer hunter. It doesn't bother me that you see that stuff. So if I was giving a science lecture or something. So
Yeah.
total cholesterol all cause mortality. Can you see that?
Yeah, that was 2018. Okay. It's 12.8
Exactly.
million adults. All right.
Exactly. You can't say it's a small study. And all cause mortality, death by any cause, right? You dying of heart disease, dying of cancer, dying of lung failure, whatever. Total
Right.
cholesterol. This is all the doctors care about, right? Half the time when you go to the cardiologist, all they want to check is your total cholesterol, which is really absurd, but let's just pretend that matters. Now, if you go down to figure two, do you see that in the middle of the page, bottom of this page, figure two, right?
Figure
Right there.
two, right there. Yeah, total cholesterol. Yeah,
Yeah,
so it's a U-shaped curve, right?
exactly. You see the total cholesterol hazard ratio, men and
Yeah,
women on the right
yeah.
there. Hazard, meaning like a high hazard of dying. You do not want a high hazard, right? When it comes to this. Now,
hmm
if you're a vegan and your total cholesterol is 110 or 120,
hmm
which most of the time it is, by the way, the
hmm
doctor will come in and he'll give you a high five and he'll say, "You are the model of good health. I'm so pleased. Yes, you have no energy. Yes, you have no sex drive. You know, yes, you're depressed, but you are the model of good health." That's what they'll tell you.
And this, just Anthony, this model, this hazard ratio is all cause mortality. What are we looking at here on the
Yeah,
hazard?
yeah.
Okay.
All cause mortality. Yeah.
So
12 point.
your all cause mortality ratio is two times higher if it's at 120
Exactly.
versus
Exactly.
220 or
200.
something like that. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
It
Yeah.
looks like it bottoms out at about 230. Is that
Yeah.
right?
I mean, I always say between 180 and 280 just to be
Yeah.
generous, right?
Yeah. But I mean,
There's
like
some error in there.
the absolute
Yeah.
bottom, all participants.
230.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I just had my cholesterol done the other day. It was 237.
Yeah. 100% optimal. And
Yeah.
that's the funniest part. Like if you, and I guarantee you, right? If you went to a normal cardiologist,
Yeah.
he probably came into the office and he was all sweaty. And he goes, "I'm sorry to inform you, you're going to die any minute of a heart attack unless we
Right.
get you on
Sure.
some
Sure.
statins."
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I haven't, because I just got some labs the other day. I haven't got them all in yet, so I'm waiting for them all to come in. But I saw my lipid panel. It was like 237 on my total. LDL was, I can't remember what it was. It was maybe 190, and my HDL was 47, which is actually up for me. I was surprised. It usually is running in the 30, so it went up a little bit. And then my triglycerides were like 65 or something like that. So
Yeah, yeah,
I'm
exactly.
happy with
Perfect.
that. I mean, my
Exactly.
inflammation markers were next to nothing, and
Exactly.
so on and so forth.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah. You'd be surprised how many people I talk to with CRP genes. They've got literally the CRP gene. You can have a variant where you have higher CRP, C-reactive protein, things like that,
mhm,
or interleukin genes that increase CRP. And sometimes people are like at a chronic level of 6 or 8 on their CRP.
yeah.
And you want to be below 1 for sure on things like that. That matters. But yeah, this idea that like, your CRP doesn't matter, but and your blood sugar doesn't matter, but your cholesterol is like the big thing. Even if we're looking at the data, which we have right here, right?
Now,
Like you
now,
want to
now
be above 200.
this is all cause mortality, and again, I think
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
the
it
ultimate
matters.
when we're talking about human
Exactly.
beings, because we're all going to die of something at some point. Now, if you were to filter that out for just cardiovascular disease, would that thing shift a little
It
bit? You
depends.
think?
It gets a little messy because if you smoke, your cholesterol, your total cholesterol goes up, and things like that. There's certain
Mhm.
things that bring up your total cholesterol because if you're chronically inflamed, your total cholesterol goes up to try and repair all that damage you're causing. So it throws kind of there's nuance there. And again, I don't like to get into all those weeds for things like this because, there's so many people that are so biased on this stuff that it's downright obnoxious. But I mean, yeah, you're correct. It does skew it back and forth depending on when you start getting into all those nuances.
Yeah. Yeah. But I guess, like I said, at the end of the day, you're going to die of something, and hopefully later rather than sooner is a goal there. But so you said you had a couple genes. Do you have another gene you wanted to discuss?
Um, Let me think about it. I mean, there's a whole bunch. There's so many of them. I guess the ABCG5 and 8 were the two that I wanted to bring up, but
Okay.
I mean, there's a ton of them that are kind of carnivore specific. Um, and it's funny how many people I'm telling, like, hey, you got to be careful with plants, like this plant and that plant. But zinc too, like obviously meat has a lot of zinc, right? And it's very bioavailable. So if you've got on a label, if you got a little hamburger patty and you look on the label, it'll say 100% daily value zinc. And zinc, super important for your testosterone, for your sex hormones. Now, if you've got a big old plate of spinach or a huge bowl of spinach and it says 100% daily value zinc, right? What's ironic about that is if you eat that little hamburger patty, almost all that zinc gets assimilated into your body, right? Very bioavailable. Your body is made of meat. You're eating meat. It goes right into your body. If you eat that giant bowl of spinach, yeah, it says 100% daily value zinc. You hardly get any of it because, it's all wrapped up in these plant proteins. Uh, they're called chelators. Uh, and a lot of people, a surprising number of people, have genes where their zinc is very important for their health, for their hormones, for this, for that, even for their blood sugar. There's a blood sugar transporter um, that requires zinc. So if you have low zinc levels, which a lot of people do, and again, there's a difference between being, deathly ill from low zinc versus being suboptimal, versus being optimal. I'm always a big fan of just people being optimized rather than just okay. But if you've got low zinc, it'll actually raise your blood sugar if you've got those blood sugar genes, for example, and on and on. So zinc is another good example of how important eating meat is for humans because of the bioavailability factor. And I know you talk about that a lot with people, bioavailability, but just to put it in context of genetics, it's interesting because so many people have those genes.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, I think if I'm not mistaken, I think the RDA, I think Chris Masterjohn mentioned this a while back, saying that the RDA has corrected for phytic acid intake. That zinc, your daily RDA for zinc doubles if you eat 1,000 milligrams of phytic acid, and triples if you eat,
Yeah.
2 grams of phytic acid, which you find in beans and legumes and grain. I think in grains, and
Right.
so
Exactly.
zinc is critical for brain function as well, if I'm not mistaken. I think there's
Oh yeah,
a
of
pretty big role
course.
for that as well. Um, there was so Harvard, again, I just saw them and I criticized them pretty heavily. I just tell them they're a bunch of idiots, but they came out with again, it's basically a regurgitation of the Eat Lancet
Of course.
diet that they just published, or they're putting out their pressing saying this is a diet for planetary health. This is something I think Walter Willett basically came up with, and it's basically more sugar than more sugar than meat, more added sugar than meat,
Ugh.
and then the
Wow.
rest is filled out with grains, mostly oil. Most of your fat's going to come from plant oils,
Mm.
and including the seed oils, and then they say unrefined grains, and then the rest is basically a bunch of weeds as far as I'm concerned. It's basically a sliver of meat, a little bit of dairy, and the rest is just sugar, grains, and seed oil, and
That's
vegetables. So
craziness.
that's just
Right.
basically, no one's gonna. I mean, you're setting people up for B12 deficiency, iron deficiency, anemia, frailty, osteoporosis,
Right.
mental health disorders, gut disorder. I mean, it's just
Right.
insane what they're wanting to do, and
Yeah.
hopefully
Well, it
enough.
feeds right into the drug companies'
Right,
bottom
right,
line,
sure,
and that's
sure,
that's where you
absolutely.
get that motivation to do that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's insane. I mean, Mayo Clinic is on board with a lot of that stuff too. It's frustrating.
Yeah, yeah. So how goes your battle with trying to get stuff done where you're at Mayo Clinic? Do they pretty much leave you alone, or they kind of say, hey,
Well, they've called me into HR a couple times complaining about different things because people call them and complain. I had a post. I did a Twitter post one time. I took a picture of a poster at Mayo Clinic. It has Mayo Clinic's name on it, and it said eat less meat and eat more healthy grains. And I took a picture of it and just all I said on Twitter, I think, was this is not scientific. Obviously, if you have, like it's so unnuanced, right? It's like, what if you're celiac, right? Do you still want to eat more grains? Like what if you've got this? What if you got IBS? Like there's just zero nuance, and that was the title of the poster. And if you read the poster, that's basically what they're pushing, more of the same, like the stuff you're just talking about. And they called me into HR with 3 HR reps sitting there, and they told me like, oh, you're misrepresenting Mayo Clinic, and you got to remove this post immediately and all this stuff just for Twitter.
Is it, I'm just wondering, are they saying that they didn't mean to say that, or the fact that you said it was unscientific is a
The fact that I was saying it's unscientific, yeah, the fact that I'm saying anything against Mayo Clinic is a problem from their perspective, so they wanted me to get rid of it.
Interesting.
Oh
So
yeah, they're pretty aggressive.
Were they able to show you the science that supports that thing, or was it?
It's just
I guess
HR people.
yeah, HR
They're all
people. It's like the people that run YouTube, the scientific advisors that run YouTube. They'll tell you what's scientific and what's not. It's
yeah, that's a
kind of
problem.
crazy.
Well, yeah, I mean, and yeah, exactly.
With regard, there was another study that came out just looking at plant versus animal protein. I think it was just published a few weeks ago, and showing the basically the, when they had per gram matched protein intake, gram for gram, even regardless of serving size. So, the typical serving size of, 3 cups of black beans to equal, 3 ounces of steak or whatever it is. You have to eat this enormous amount of plant material to get the same amount of protein. Well, they did that, and even despite matching it gram for gram, muscle protein synthesis was something like 40% of what it was in meat, and it showed
Right.
greater muscle breakdown and less nitrogen balance. So it's
Yeah.
just it's just a disaster as far as trying to, if you believe in preserving lean mass, which I think is
Well, and a lot of those studies are open to a lot of bullshit, because at my lab in Mayo Clinic, I used to be in the orthopedic surgery department, by the way, which I think you knew that, but I actually switched over to the physiology department because I didn't like one of the surgeons I had to work with all the time. He was an ass. No offense to you, it's just him.
no, there were plenty of jerks in orthopedics.
Oh,
I
he's such
work with
a
many of them, so
jock.
no, yeah, there's some.
Yeah, I'm sure you've dealt with more than I have, but I just couldn't deal with it anymore, so I switched over to physiology just because the culture was so much more fun and interesting. But in the physiology department, one of the main chairmen there, he's he's done several of these studies where he does muscle biopsies, and then he checks for all kinds of stuff like you're talking about, like protein synthesis or whatever the markers. I mean, a million different things, right? You can do all kinds of stuff. And he finds that unless you take 5 different muscle biopsies, the results are variable, they're useless. And nobody does that. Like, how often would you have participants go in and volunteer for muscle biopsies where they actually take a hole punch and punch out a piece of your muscle? How often are they going to do that 5 times on your tricep or whatever, right? Like, people wouldn't even let you do that. They do one muscle biopsy on 5 different people or whatever, 10 people, and they make these crazy claims, right? Oftentimes, I'm not saying that study's crazy, but there's a lot of them that conflict, right? You can always find the conflicting study, and if you're a PubMed guru, right, you can always be cherry picking and looking for these things, and that's the problem, right? Like, these studies are so open to shenanigans that it's hard to cut through all that stuff, especially if you don't have a PhD or if you've never done actual research. Because when you do research, you're always asking yourself, like how can this be corrupted, or how can this be problematic? And there's so many ways you can have problems there that you're always wondering, like, well, sure, the study says that, but is it really the case? And that's a good way to think about it, is like the muscle biopsy example. Just think of that in the future. And I'm not saying you, I'm saying your audience too. Like, ask yourself, look, did they do 5 biopsies per person on this study? Like, where are the flaws potentially, and how can they overinterpret this study in weird ways that are going to conflict with reality? Because that's what you're supposed to be doing. You're supposed to be finding, answering questions about reality and the way things actually work, and oftentimes they're not. But that was interesting. That was an interesting addition. Like, I never thought about that. 5 biopsies in one single person, to get at the, to get rid of all the, because if you take it from here versus there versus over here, you get totally different results, he says. you know? So if you just took one, it's a snapshot that could be way off.
Yeah, I mean, you know, my faith in science diminishes every week, I
Hmm.
think. You know,
Exactly. Exactly.
and
Oh,
you know,
mine does too.
and it's interesting, you know, I use the word faith because some people, it has become a religion for some people, you know, it's kind of, we saw that in the last year where the science, the science, the science. And, you know, it's like, you know, when we look at, you know, like for instance, the nutritional science, when the baseline is an you know, food frequency questionnaire. I mean, that's your data come in. It's just like that's just like ridiculous. And then we're looking at this, you know, I mean, not to be too controversial, but I think when we base a pandemic on a PCR result, which, you know, has a 40 cycle threshold, I mean, it's like,
Yep. Yep.
I
It's
mean,
crazy.
we don't even know. I mean, it's just like we've got data that is just complete garbage, and
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
it's maddening to see this stuff. But
It's almost used as a tool in a lot of situations just to try and basically to try and get an outcome that they want, you know, certain people want. Now it's not always like that. There's other areas where there's no bias and they're honestly asking legitimate questions and really trying to use the tools we have to answer those questions. But there's so many areas that are politically sensitive that are corrupted. Um, you know, captured is what they call it, right? Like on YouTube, if you get captured, it means, you know, you're biased in some way. And there's certain areas that are very very prone to being captured based on the money and the politics, and you know, it's what you see. It's reality.
anyway, well,
Hmm.
what are you doing in Mississippi? You just down there vacationing? Or are you hunting, or what are you doing there?
Yeah, I'm hog hunting with my crossbow. I was trying to do a video shooting a hog with my crossbow. I'm not having great luck, but you know, they're out here, they're here. And then I'm doing some fishing. I did some flounder gigging too. I got my first flounder with a spear the other
Oh,
night. I
nice.
was out
Yeah.
with a night. You shine a flashlight in the water and you poke on them, try
Yeah.
and get one.
Flounder is a nice thing to eat. They're
It's
good.
good food. Yeah. Yeah. So this time of year is great for flounder gigging, and it's always good for hog hunting because they don't disappear.
One of our guys get one of our members a suggestion you hunt the hog with a spear. Might be
Yeah, I would do
challenging.
that. Yeah. I've done it with dogs before and I wasn't that impressed because the dogs, they surround the hogs and then you just
Yeah.
walk right up to it and shoot it with my bow. And
Yeah.
I like actually getting after. I'd do the spear thing. That would be pretty wild.
There's are they having these are feral hogs, I'm assuming. Is
Oh
there
yeah.
any,
Yeah.
are they overrunning Mississippi? Like I guess in Texas they're having big issues with feral hogs running all over the place.
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. But they're harder to find here because of the trees and stuff. My buddy, I have a friend down here. He owns some Airbnbs right on the ocean, so he lets me stay for free on a pretty sweet place. So it's hard to pass up. But then he also owns 350 acres, and he's got hogs all over the place on this property. But he's not a hunter. He's never been hunting before, so he doesn't really know. The thing is people are poaching on his land. I've got ATV tracks all over his land, and he never
Mhm.
goes out there and stuff. And then one of the neighbors like, "Oh yeah, did you come out last year and shoot 20 hogs?" And I was like, "No."
Somebody did,
And
yeah.
yeah, somebody obviously cleaned a lot of them out, so they're sparse, unfortunately.
How do the feral hogs rate as far as eating compared to
They're
like,
great.
yeah.
I don't care what anybody's. They're tough. They are kind of tough. It's so funny in Florida. I used to get paid to hog hunt, Sean, in college. They used to pay me the founder of my university is a billionaire. His name is Tom Monahan. He founded Domino's Pizza. He uh he called me up one time. He was starting a new town. He owns a town, or he founded a town in Florida called Ave Maria. And he
Ave
he was
Maria. Is he an
yeah,
opera
he was
singer or what, opera guy or
yeah,
something?
exactly, exactly. Well, yeah, and he was building baseball diamonds because he used to own the Detroit Tigers, and he was putting in sod, and the hogs were coming in at night just flipping over all the new sod he was putting in. And he calls me and he goes, "Look, I heard you're a bow hunter. I'll pay you $50 a pop. I'll fly you down here, shoot as many hogs as you can. It's got to be with a bow. I don't want guns on this new town, blah blah." Sure, I went down, I shot 14 of them. And so in Florida, I had them hanging up in his. He has got this like walk-in freezer, and I had a bunch of hogs hanging up in there. I was butchering them and just hanging them up in his freezer. And a bunch of people from the town heard about this, and they were like, "No, he's not shooting hogs." And they went out and to see, and then they started offering me money for these hogs, and they were like super pumped about getting hog meat, right? Well, if you go to Texas, they're the opposite. They think they're like poisonous or something. You go to Texas and you shoot the same damn animal, and people are like, no, 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 you can't eat the hogs. They're full of parasites and they're full of toxins or whatever they say. And it's so stupid because they taste the same. They're amazing. obviously you got to get the guts out right away, and you don't want to shred them up with a bunch of lead. Like people go out with ARs and they just shoot a bunch of shots into them, and then you got lead fragments all over. But shoot them with the bow. Use a copper bullet, like a Barnes bullet that expands, and just drops them flat. That's what I do, a 30-06 with a Barnes bullet, or I shoot them with my bow, and the meat's phenomenal. I usually just take their back straps. You just shoot enough of them so you can take like a whole bunch of tenderloins and back straps and stuff, and then you're good to go. I'll get hundreds of pounds of meat, every year with that. It's
I'll tell
great.
you, Anthony, if we ever go to the meat crisis shortage, I'm going to go look you up for some hog meat, man, or something.
Anytime you want to hunt some, we'll
Yeah.
figure something out.
Yeah, there's a, like I said, hopefully that silliness won't prevail, but who knows? I mean, we're in some crazy times, I think. What's the latest research you're doing right now?
I mean, mostly I've been shifting away from Mayo Clinic and doing more and more DNA consulting because that's the demand. I can't keep up with my research as much, so I feel like I'm helping a lot more people. I mean, I've been doing some lung physiology stuff with confocal microscopy, but again, it's kind of boring sounding. It's very technical to get into, trying to basically improve some of the imaging at the cellular level, biochemistry. So it's not even clinically applicable, but it does help other researchers and things. But again, it's very technical, and I've been trying to shift, much more into DNA consult, especially because the special forces, they've got me doing a bunch of DNA consulting for their operators. So, I've had to back off the research to do that. I gave a couple talks for them there, and
what kind of DNA consulting is applicable or beneficial to these special operators? I mean, what kind of
mostly related to their like athletic genes and even their blood sugar gene. I mean, pretty much everything, right? Like they want to see the brain genes, how well can their brains handle blasting, because blasting can increase amyloid beta in your brain. So if you're dealing with a lot of explosives and stuff, even in training, it can trigger amyloid plaques, just like head injuries, just from those sonic waves and or whatever. There's so many variables. It's just pretty standard DNA consulting I do for them. But I obviously frame it in the context of, okay, here you're a super high performing individual. Let's think through your goals. It's just like anybody else, right? But just a little bit more confidential. Obviously, I have to buy the DNA kits with my credit card and then give them to one person, and then they distribute them. So it's all numbers, and I mean, I talk to the people, but it's all just super confidential numerical stuff. Like, oh, you're number 1, you're number 22, whatever the numbers are. But it's just 23andMe. It's the same old. You don't need a full genome sequencing because 23andMe has over 600,000 SNPs. And that's plenty of information to help optimize health if you're willing to dig into those SNPs really, really deeply. Again, ABCG8 is a good example, right? Like those are SNPs, you know what I mean?
Well, let me, because you've identified the quote unquote the carnivore gene. I mean, is there a vegan gene? Is there any genes out there that say, yeah, you definitely need to go vegan then?
No, there's genes that you should eat plants though. I mean, have you ever seen the TV show Alone?
Yeah, I think we had one of the winners, one of the contest winners as a podcast
nice.
guest. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Good. Jordan? Was it Jordan? Or do you not remember?
It might have been Jordan. It was a guy. He was one of the guy. He got a moose or something like that.
Yeah. That's Jordan. Yeah, he's a
Jordan. Yeah. We had
most of the
Jordan
time I watch that show and I say like, oh, I could do that. Like, but then Jordan, he impressed me. I was like, that guy, he kicks ass. He's pretty legit. But the show just came out again this year. It's literally the only TV show I actually buy on Amazon Prime, and I watch it with my kids. And what's funny is oftentimes you get these vegans on that show, right? Because they're dropping, for people that don't watch the show, they're dropping people off in the wilderness. They're letting them survive, and whoever survives the longest, it's like just a dozen people, but whoever survives the longest gets like $1 million or something. And you get these vegans sometimes on the show, and they're not like super religious zealot vegans, but they're vegans, and they'll be like, oh, I love plants and plants are my soul and all this kind. And then like 2 weeks into the survival, they're like, I need some meat. It's great. They're desperately looking for meat and searching around for fish, and they're out hunting. It's just something our ancestors did. And the other thing our ancestors did was intermittent fasting. There's no question we did intermittent fasting because all of us have genes for intermittent fasting. And when you watch people in those situations, they're definitely not eating breakfast and then having a snack 3 hours later and then having lunch 3 hours later and etc. But I can't even remember why I brought up alone. Oh, the vegan gene, right?
Mhm.
There are genes where people should eat certain plants occasionally, in my opinion. Like there's a heart disease gene where that's very sensitive to flavonoids, and flavonoids are in plants, and people just had a genetic background where their ancestors had a lot of berries or whatever had flavonoids in them, and they should eat plants with flavonoids to protect their arteries. Now, again, you could argue, well, if you don't have inflammation, you're not going to damage your arteries, and then you don't need the flavonoids. But I mean, that's a risk I'm not willing to take. I'd say, like, if you got those flavonoid dependent genes, I would just take the flavonoids because your genes are looking for that booster, in flavonoids and things like that. There's definitely some genes like that. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. That's just interesting to know. It may be
But that doesn't
beneficial
mean
for
you should go
people.
vegan, right?
Well, no, I can't see a real, exciting reason that would compel, any of us to want to go vegan other than sort of mental illness, perhaps. But yeah, that would be
You
interesting
mean
if they.
you're trying to get mental
Right, right.
illness, you mean?
You're actually, maybe it's more, your life is too boring and you figured it would work better if you're bipolar or
If
something
you're
like that. I don't know.
schizophrenic. Yeah. Yeah.
It might be more entertaining, or that you get to entertain yourself with the voices and
Oh
stuff
man.
like that. But do you find that, and I think it would be interesting to stick one of these really hyperzealot, ethical based vegans out in one of those situations and, one of those shows and see how they did. You get like, whether it's Freely the Banana Girl and stick her out, take her from Ecuador or wherever she is and put her up in, Alaska or wherever they do these shows and see how she fares. I think it would be an interesting exercise in that. Might see someone dead. They might have
Yeah,
to,
no, she probably would. She'd probably just die. Legit.
or be med evacuated out of there or something like that. It's interesting. Yeah, I had there was a show, Naked and Afraid, it's a similar uh, type of show, and we had a guest, Kai Furneaux, that I interviewed a couple of years ago, and she was a vegetarian, and she was like a stunt woman in Hollywood for years. She was a vegetarian and managed to make that happen. But she went on that show, and she survived. She ended up eating like lizards and stuff. I mean, she ended up eating meat during the show, but she said it took her like 2 years to recover because she lost like, I don't know, 15 or 20 kilos, something like that. A lot of weight.
Yeah.
And it took her like 2 years to put it back on. And then she became carnivore and is out in the Australian outback hunting for herself
Wow.
and side. And she
Awesome.
went back on the show like 3 years later or 4 years later as a carnivore. And she said, yeah, she lost weight again. And, because it's just hard to get food. And then she went right back to her carnivore diet. And she said she was like 3 days later, she was basically back to new. I mean, she recovered so much quicker.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
Awesome. Oh, I'm not
Yeah.
surprised. It's cool. Well, I think that's the way to solve this homeless food crisis and all that is just, like let people shoot hogs and use them for meat, like let them sell the hog meat if you want. You want to solve the hog problem,
I mean,
like
what is the extent of the hog problem, by the way? I mean, is there like, I don't
it's
even know how
crazy.
many. So, I mean,
I've seen hogs with the litter of 12, and apparently they can have like 3 or 4 litters a year. I've literally seen them, like a mother hog with like 12 little wild hogs running around them. I've caught them. You can run after them if you're quick. I'm a quick sprinter, and I've caught a baby pig before. The mother's not too too happy, but usually I shoot the mother first, and then I go run after the little ones. And I just let it go. But there's a lot of them, and they just keep kicking out babies. It's a great resource, I feel like, that people are wasting by just going out there pleasure shooting them. You know what I mean? I mean, I don't have a problem with pleasure shooting them just because of the situation, but I think we should be utilizing it
Well,
as a
yeah, I mean,
meat
it doesn't
source.
make sense to shoot an animal and not eat it. I mean, to me, I mean, I
Yeah,
don't, I
same.
mean, I would say pleasure shooting. I mean, I don't, anyway, that's
Well,
something that,
unless it's disease, right? Like I used
yeah, I
to
mean, if
trap
it's
foxes and stuff.
disease or if it's,
Sometimes foxes have like,
yeah, I
yeah,
mean, there's some animals that are identified as dangerous. I mean, I know this even happens with elephants in Africa, which is as sad as it sounds, but I think there's elephants that have been identified as destroying people's villages, and they actually fly somebody in to hunt an
yeah,
elephant, which happens
correct. Oh yeah,
occasionally.
yeah,
Yeah.
they're super destructive when they're overpopulated. I mean, that's pretty much the, you know, the the wildlife managers are pretty damn good when you get around the country and hunt as much as I do.
Hmm.
It's well managed. It's funny. You guys will love this in your group. I was just out in Oregon fishing white sturgeon. They're like 1,000-pound fish. They get huge. The biggest one I caught was 72 inches, but still a decent fish. And um, they said the population is way down because of the sea lions, like these multiple 1,000-pound sea lions are coming in and just picking them up and killing them and eating them. And I was talking to a bunch of people out there at the bait shops and stuff about this, and they're like, well, yeah, because I was saying, well, what do you do with the sea lions are overpopulated? Because they're all over. And they were saying, well, they actually have the government come in at night and shoot them. And I'm like, damn, what do they do with all that meat? They're like, well, they just waste it. They just bury them in a landfill. It's like, well, that's stupid. It's just because of the politics, right? Like if you gave people licenses, they would pay for licenses and they would keep that meat. It'd be like this prized possession. Like, hey, you want to try some sea lion? I've got 1,000 pounds of meat, right? People would love that. But instead, because of the politics, that's the problem when the politics start creeping in. You start wasting meat and losing these valuable resources, and then it gets super irritating. But as long as as long as you keep that politics out of it and all the bullshit out of it, even things like that, we could be capitalizing on instead of sniping them at night with like silencers.
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, just sea lion meat. I wonder, have you ever had that? Or I
I have
mean,
no idea. No, I'm
I
sure
mean,
it's probably
obviously people have
protected.
eaten them. I mean, I think that's something that probably Inuit and whatever would have
Yeah.
eaten them.
Oh, for sure.
Clearly,
For sure. I'm sure it's really interesting. Probably really unique.
I know
But
because I've got. I don't know if you know. There's a guy named Cameron Haynes.
oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, Cam
Oh yeah.
sent me something, and he. I guess he's had bear recently. He's killed several
Huh?
bear, and people got upset
Yeah,
because he's
spring.
killing bear.
Spring season. Yeah.
But I wonder how. I've not had bear meat. Have you had
Bear is
that?
good.
Yeah.
I'm trapping. If you want to come join me next fall, September 1st, I'm going to be trapping a bear in Maine. That's the only state you can trap them. And it's ethical. It's surprisingly ethical because you'd think a bear trap, it looks like a big giant steel thing, whatever. It's not. The new ones they have, they're like cables. They're like cable snares that it basically puts a cable around their foot
Hmm.
and then it tethers them to a tree. And then you get to walk up on an angry bear with my kids and stuff. And, you just shoot it in the head. But, got all that good bear meat. We'll cook some up fresh there. It's really good. Yeah, I love bear meat. I mean, obviously, you got to cook it pretty good because they have trichinosis, just like pigs oftentimes do. You got to cook pork really well.
Hmm.
So that makes it a little bit less appetizing because you got to overcook it a little bit, but it's phenomenal. It's great.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, invite's open, Sean.
Yeah,
September
I
1st.
definitely look. Like I said, particularly, like I said, if we have to look, if we have to start fighting for ourselves to get meat, hopefully that won't be the case anytime soon. But yeah, sure, that sounds great, Anthony. Well, it's unfortunately I've got to go to another meeting here. It's been an hour. It's been a quick hour. It's been fun. Let folks know where to go. I'm sure some people are interested in probably looking at. I know one of our members, Dana, said she had you look at her DNA. So where do people go to if they wanted to have uh, have a DNA consulting session with you or find out more about you? I know you're on Twitter, I think, and I don't know where
I
else you're
used
on
to be.
social media.
I got off Twitter. I'm on
Okay.
Instagram,
Okay.
but
Instagram. Okay.
yeah, Anthony GJ. But but AJ Consulting Company is my main website. And I'm also starting up more YouTube videos. I hired a videographer to do some outdoor stuff. So instead of just me doing self filming, which I tried to do before, but I wasn't motivated enough, it's too much work. I actually hired a guy just to do video editing. So we're kicking out some cool outdoor videos. And then I'm going to try and do some more science videos too on the YouTube channel. I've done some. I did one recently on sunshine and the health benefits of sunshine, for example. But yeah, AJ Consulting Company or YouTube, or
What are the
Instagram.
health benefits of sunshine? Just to
Oh,
quickly,
there's
I
a
mean,
bunch.
obviously vitamin D conversion, but what are some of
Yeah,
the other
well, some people have a genetic risk for high bilirubin, and
right?
it's chronic, right? And those are another example where people get the kidney stones and all this other stuff from bilirubin buildup, and that sunshine breaks it down. Um,
It's like a jaundiced baby, right? Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and adults can just chronically have sort of high bilirubin, and after 10 years, suddenly they got kidney stones. You know what I mean? Um, so that's one. Another one is toxin removal. Like people don't like to use the word toxins, but like if you've got a tattoo and you're not putting sunscreen on, it'll break it down, right? The sunshine, because it breaks down those big balls of heavy metals into smaller heavy metals, and then your body clears them out. And that's exactly what happens with sunshine. Without tattoos, if you just have toxins under your skin, which everybody does constantly, right? Our body's constantly in the state of toxin clearance at varying degrees. So sunshine helps with toxin clearance. It actually, have you heard of melanitan, the peptide people inject?
I have not. No.
Yeah, so it's where we get the word tan, right? Because
Right.
melanotan stimulates your melanocytes and gets you tan. But you can inject this stuff, and I've done it, of course, just messing around with some of these peptides. And what was interesting, I did 3 injections of melanotan, and I was tan for an entire month, which is pretty absurd for me because I'm a redhead. But what's even more interesting, Sean, was I got super hungry and I was eating loads of food and I was just burning tons of calories. Sunshine increases melanitan, which increases your appetite and your metabolism. Another benefit, right? There's a bunch of them. So those are in my video, and and I do videos like that occasionally. I try and get them out once a week, but I usually fail, so it's a little less frequent.
Yeah, I suspect, and it just makes sense that, climate, sun exposure, temperature are going to affect appetite. I mean, you think, I mean, I just look at, like these Inuit who live in a very cold environment, but I don't know what the sunshine is. Maybe they have a lot of sunshine exposure, but it's cold, certain times of year. Obviously in the wintertime they're not, but in summer, but it's cold up there. They eat something like 4 to 8 pounds of meat a day is what at least the metabolism studies from the 20s showed. And they're not very big people. And I think, they're having to generate all this body heat. There's constantly
Right.
creating heat, so they're going to do that. But then the sun exposure, you'd think, well, if I live at the equator, I may not need to eat as much food. I don't know, man, but maybe it's something.
Yeah. Well, it depends. I mean, yeah. I mean, that's just the mechanism. The sunshine will improve your metabolism, whether you're eating more or less. You'd be surprised, like a lot of people, if they just get their shirt off and get out in the sun, they'll notice a metabolic boost. Obviously it would plateau at some point. I don't know if it's as big as cold thermogenesis, but it definitely does give you a boost.
Yeah, I mean, I always feel better. I think every year when it's spring, when it's kind of spring and it's warmer, I just feel better. Just for whatever.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing, right? Like, there's a gene called PER3. It's period circadian regulator gene. It's the seasonal affective disorder gene. There's a few of them, but like people get seasonal affective too, and that's super common. Where you live in Portland, like the guy I was talking this morning, or you live in Minnesota, where I live. In the middle of winter, you can get depression if you're not out in the sun or you're not getting, and that's in your retina and on your skin. So they're both beneficial.
Yeah, I'm getting ready to move from sunny Southern California up to the Pacific Northwest for a few years, so I'll have to deal with that. I've already
Which
got
town?
some.
Which city?
We're moving to a little town called Snohomish, which is it's kind of near Seattle. It's about 30 miles from Seattle, but we're going to be on about 5 acres out, kind of a little bit in the country, a little bit. So
Cool. I like it. Yeah, out in the country is always better, in my opinion.
yeah, exactly.
Is that close to Greenfield? Is that Greenfield country, like Spokane?
No,
Or not
Spokane. I
that
think
far?
Spokane is farther east. It's
Okay.
I think we're still West Coast, so we're still
Okay.
kind
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
basically
Oh yeah.
Seattle area. So we have
Up
to deal
close to the ocean.
with some of that. But yeah. But
Oh,
anyway.
cool. Well, yeah. Good for you. I like it.
Well, speaking of which, anyway, I gotta go do that
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
It's been a
thanks.
pleasure talking to you again. Good luck.
Thanks, you too.
Hopefully, let's chat again down the road, man.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. Take
All right,
care.
guys. We'll see you guys later. Take care, everybody. Bye bye now.
Yep.